Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. It's been 20 years since the world stood by and watched one of the worst killing sprees of modern times, the genocidal slaughter in Rwanda of 800,000 ethnic Tutsi and moderate Hutus. Now, my guest today, Johan Swinnen, was Belgium's ambassador to Rwanda in the tragic years from 1990 to 1994. Now, he says that he saw the stage set for a national tragedy on the eve of the genocide. But he maintains that neither he nor other diplomats like himself at the time could possibly have foreseen the scale of the massacre that was to come. Now, 2 decades on, he's still haunted by some very basic, unanswered questions. How did so many people turn so radical, so violent, and so extreme so fast? Who laid the trap? Who led the death squads that proved so brutally efficient with their machetes? Thanks for being with us today, former ambassador.
My pleasure.
You were there just before the genocide. You saw everything. You say you saw all of the pawns being lined up, so to speak. The ethnic hatred, the radio stations preaching ethnic hate, inciting people to attack each other, the politics falling apart in the country, no reconciliation, no peace. What did you do to warn the world? You were there. You were absolutely witnessing this all. How did you tell your superiors outside what was going on?
Thank you for the invitation. Indeed, I arrived in Rwanda. It was my first ambassadorial post. I was relatively young. In August 90. So at the moment of the genocide, I was almost at the end of my term. And 6 weeks after my arrival, there was a first invasion, the first attack of the RPF, of the rebels. And from that moment on till the genocide, the government and the political and economic and social forces were confronted, including the diplomatic community, were confronted with 2 major challenges: making peace, negotiating, reconciliation, peace, but also internal reforms, democratization of the country.
But let me just jump in here, because there was, and the world has largely forgotten this, in 1993, there were accords, a pact signed, the Arusha Accords. Exactly. It seemed a year before the genocide that the country was on the road, perhaps, to democracy and peace.
Exactly. There was a lot of hope, a lot of expectation. And you speak about a lot of questions and questionings I'm still struggling with, but we had also certainties, convictions that this was the only way for Rwanda to achieve reconciliation and to build le Rwanda nouveau, a new Rwanda.
But you listened. And you've said this before in your speeches, you knew what the radio stations were saying on both sides of the ethnic divide. The so-called Mille Collines radio station and the others, they were preaching hatred. Before the genocide, they were telling their followers, their ethnicity, to go out and kill people.
Because indeed, I would say, or dare to say, that even the agreements were not well explained. The compromise of Arusha was a very important compromise, but a very delicate compromise. For instance, the power, political and military power sharing, was explained almost in details in these accords. And these accords were rather advantageous to the rebels, to the RPF. And I kept telling...
To the Tutsi rebels.
To the Tutsi rebels. I kept telling the president and his entourage, there is no alternative, because this compromise might not be the ideal compromise, but it will lead at the end of 22 months, and that was agreed also in the accords, to elections. And do explain it to all these displaced persons on the hills.
Hundreds of thousands of displaced people.
Hundreds of thousands, that they can go back to their fields and work and live in peace as soon as the agreements are put into place and are implemented.
You're talking obviously about, when you say you told the president, you're talking about the former Hutu president of Rwanda, Juvenal Habyarimana.
Yes.
I perhaps pronounce his name wrong.
Perfectly.
His
Yeah.
plane being shot down on April 6th, 1994, is seen as the single trigger event for the genocide. You left Rwanda 6 days later.
Yeah.
How did that happen? You're there for 4 years watching the build-up, and all of a sudden, you're gone 6 days after that.
One thing more about the radicalization and the brutal, tragic destabilization we feared. One element, of course, was the radio. There was the implosion of the Democratic Center. There were the militia. There were the arms distribution. All very awkward ingredients. But there was also the assassination of the Burundi president
in 1993.
in October 93. So there was an acceleration of polarization and radicalization.
But the plane
and
was
that
shot
led
down.
to the plane.
I do,
that was
yeah.
shot.
It led to the plane. But let me just ask you, how do you respond to someone today who says, Mr. Ambassador, you were there for 4 years before the genocide. You left 6 days after it began. You left the country.
Well, there is, of course, the overall story, the context. They were killing Belgians. They were killing the peace agreements. There was no accord anymore. So there was no room for continuation of the mandate of the UN troops. There was, because the accord didn't exist anymore. It was disrupted in a very brutal way.
You were ordered to leave. You were evacuated.
And I was ordered, the more that 10 paratroops, Belgian paratroops were killed, as you know, but also 12 Belgian civilians. And on the radio, Radio Télévision Libre d'Émile Colline, we heard appeals for killing Belgians. So it was very difficult for the Belgians to stay. But the UN decided, also because the Belgian diplomacy and the government pleaded for another agreement, another conception, another in a presence of the UN troops, and that was indeed a very very serious mistake.
A lot of people say that the Belgians were about half of the UN mission at the time. When they pulled out, that essentially ended the UN mission. It was down to 200 troops after the Belgians pulled out.
The Belgians were, I would say, the ossature,
the
épine dorsale,
the structure,
of about 400 troops.
The backbone.
The backbone.
Yeah.
The backbone. Out of 2,000, between 2,500 and 3,000 troops. But it was a very strong backbone indeed. And this backbone was considered as being a very strong element for the credibility of the peace agreements.
But did you tell the Prime Minister? I know he said at one point, I don't want the death of my ambassador to be on my conscience.
Yeah.
Did you tell him, sir, my job is to stay here?
Well, it was a very, very, you can imagine, a very difficult discussion over the phone. The phone did work, fortunately, between Brussels and Kigali. And it was not the Prime Minister, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Willy Klaas. He told me, you have to leave because you are in danger. I knew that, because 2 hours after the downing of the plane, a colonel, a Rwandese colonel of the regular forces, came to see me and told me, Ambassador, you are on the list of Hutu power. They want to kill you. They are going to kill you. Stay home. Don't move.
So
a few days later, we had our troops for evacuation. And I wanted to complete the evacuation before leaving the embassy. And of course, I could not allow myself to leave before the other colleagues, Belgian diplomats, members of the embassy. That's why in the first time and the first hours, I refused to quit. And finally, we had to. We had to leave.
You felt like
the pressure of the streets.
Too much pressure.
Also,
you had no choice.
What happened in the street?
We're running out of time. I want to ask you, on this 20th anniversary of the commemoration, we've heard Rwanda's current president, Paul Kagame, give a speech in which he is now still blaming France and Belgium, to a lesser extent, for failing to prevent the genocide, but also being complicit in carrying out the genocide. How do you answer those charges today when the president says that?
I'm a little bit surprised. I would like to have some more explicit explanation of that question. I do think, and I keep thinking that as far the whole period till beginning of the genocide, till the Belgian troops and the UN troops left under decision of the Security Council, Belgium had a very committed and courageous policy and diplomacy. We were pleading every day for democratization, for multipartism, for human rights, respect of human rights, for making inquiries of what happened on the hills and in Kigali. We were very strongly committed, and even in this logic of being complice with peace
complicit
and democratization, we even sent troops, UN troops, but if there is some debate and some questioning, and there were excuses presented by the Prime Minister of Belgium.
Of Belgium, not by France.
Of not staying and securing and protecting the endangered people, that's indeed a serious debate we will address, and we have already addressed.
Ms. Former Ambassador Johan Svinnen, we're going to have to leave it there. A topic we're not going to resolve today, questions we're not going to answer today. But I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, your experience as the ambassador on the eve of what is the worst genocide, really, in modern times in Rwanda. Thanks to all of you for watching the interview here on France 24.
Thank you.